Welcome to the Pretty Nerdy Talk Show, folks. I am very excited to show you my guest for today. Her name is Haley Rivers. She has a book coming out in December, which you're going to want to check out. For those of you who are fans of Gilmore Girls, you're going to love the show because we both have a talking speed of the Gilmore Girls. And it was just a lot of fun to sit with her and chat. We went through a lot of material all at once, and she is a wealth of knowledge, folks. So, those of you who are aspiring writers, aspiring DMs, she has her feet firmly planted on both sides of the realm. So, there's something for everyone. I hope you stick around and watch. Welcome to the Pretty Nerdy Talk Show. We have with us today, we have Haley Rivers. Haley has a debut novel launching in December, which I'm really excited to talk to her about. We have yet to have on the channel a female or woman with TTRPG experience. So I'm really excited to chat with her about this. So let's get started here, Haley, and talk about your journey to kind of where you're at now with either your fiction writing or if you want to start with tabletop role playing, we can start with that too. And a little bit about yourself also, I guess. You know, we want to know who you are.
Smart. I love tabletop gaming. I kind of took two different routes with my notes, both people who are interested in original debut fiction work, but then also people who are more focused on the TTRPG side because world building is so important in both of those. And I agree that we need more women in both of those, especially the TTRPG world, because we just need more of our faces out there because it can be a lot of fun.
A little more representation, right?
Exactly, yeah. My name's Haley. I started writing, if you can call it writing, my very first experience was writing Inuyasha fan fiction back in like middle school.
I loved Inuyasha. That's amazing.
It's the gateway anime, I'm telling you. That's what I started with. I started co-writing with some friends in 7th grade, and then of course teachers don't really like it when you're writing in the middle of their classes, so I was met with a lot of opposition, throwing away notebooks, saying give up on writing, it's never going to make you any money, focus on more real things. Nonsense now that I'm about to publish my first novel. So after that, I dabbled in writing, but I never did anything seriously. I do have one published book from high school that was also horrendous, but is a great example on how not to write nowadays.
Wow, so you have something published all the way back since high school.
Yes.
That's impressive.
Sophomore year, I believe. It was like a take on the 7 deadly sins, very teenage angst kind of style. After that, I went to college. I got a degree actually in criminal justice and literature for Spanish culture and reading. I started up with D&D for the first time again after moving out on my own. I actually found it through unlikely means by using a meet and greet app called Meetup. And I found a queer group in the area that I was living in North Carolina. And we started off just doing board games, things like that. And then it turns out a lot of them actually wanted to start a Dungeons and Dragons group, and they invited me to join. And that group was amazing. It was very classic, like going over to their house every week, bring your snacks, dress up, play the music, goof around. And they really ignited my love for it. And it went as far as like when I actually moved to the job I have now, they did my character an in-game send-off. Because I wasn't going to be able to continue.
Lovely.
Yeah, so I have a very close place in my heart for Dungeons and Dragons.
Wow.
After that, I moved to Tennessee, where I am now, which apparently a lot of authors are actually from. Didn't know that. Like V.E. Schwab is from here, a couple of other big people. And I looked for D&D all over the place, couldn't find it. COVID hit, so of course everything in person got shut down.
Yeah.
And through that, I found an online group, which was also mostly queer representation, and they actually did a stream, and it started with Stormlord's Wrath that they invited me to play, which is a popular 5e module. Mm-hmm. And I guess what kind of made me popular in there is I started off as a player because it's a lot easier than DMing, but they loved my details and descriptions of what my character was doing so often that they basically like pleaded with me to DM at least a one-shot game. And so I did. I was like, you know what? We created a little one-shot called Warlocks Anonymous, and the only caveat was that every player had to either be a warlock or a player pretending to be a warlock. And then that was the story element that we brought into it and got into all sorts of shenanigans.
And this was a one-shot?
Yep, it was a one-shot.
The
Uh,
premise sounds fantastic. And just so you know, if I look away, it's because I'm taking notes because I don't want to interrupt, but I have tons of questions. So
oh
go.
no, if I talk too fast or start going off, feel free to
No,
let
you're
me know.
doing fantastic. All right, so
So
Warlocks Anonymous. That's okay. Keep
yeah,
going.
that was the first one shot that we actually created from scratch. We took a little bit of inspiration from a great writing tool I'm going to mention later called DungeonMastersGuild.com.
Mhm.
Amazing resource for TTRPG. Whether you
Yes.
want to load a unique one shot or if you want to get your work out there, it's a great way to go. And then after that, I was like, you know what? The content's getting too original, too big in terms of a one shot. I think I want to sort of shift my focus back to fiction writing, and I'm still in that D&D group. We don't play D&D now as much anymore. We're playing Monster Hearts or something like that right now. And then we game together. But I've been focusing on Trials of Ira, which is the book that I'm releasing in December. It's a
Yeah.
dark fantasy that I'm really looking forward to. And I actually just got my final edits back from the developmental editor today. It's going to the copy editor next, and then it'll be on its way to the publishing platforms.
Ooh, fantastic. Where are you going to be publishing it at?
So I'm going to start with just doing Kindle, just because it's technically incomplete. I split it up into 3 parts, which are all their own self-contained arcs, because there was so much world building that had to go into it. And I didn't want to info dump on people. So I was like, let me just split it up into 3 mini stories that all go together. So it'll be on Amazon. And then after that, I might end up doing Ingram Sparks and looking to local bookstores in Tennessee.
That's great. Okay, so gosh, so much to go back and talk about here. First of all, the fact that you were published in high school is just fantastic. So it sounds like you've kind of had a love for this since you were very young.
Yes.
Yes, which is so far been my experience with everyone I've talked to. If it's in you, it's in you. Which is good to know because I feel like, I don't know. I've seen this on a lot of writing forums where there are a few people that go through a lot of self-doubt because either the writing experience isn't what you think it was, or maybe they got into it thinking like I'm gonna be that author that makes $1 million on my first book, or whatever it is. But I think it's important to kind of think back and reflect. Like if this is something that has been in you a long time, I think it's gonna happen at some point.
It keeps coming back. Yeah, it keeps coming
Yeah,
back.
you can't not
The
do it.
the main thing that we set ourselves up for failure with when we're freelance authors or self-publishing or even just trying to go the traditional route is we do expect to be like the Stephen Kings, the
Right.
Lee Bardugo's. Like those are 1 in a million. That's not going to happen, and that's where a lot of the self-doubt and conflict comes from because you're putting all your work and your time and your effort into this story that maybe 50 people are going to read. So
Right.
you always have to keep it separate. Like I'm writing because I enjoy writing and I don't expect to make a living out of this, and just hope for the best.
Right, right. Okay, gosh, I'm gonna go back and touch on real quick about this criminal justice. So, did you say
Yeah.
is that what you were trying to get a degree in? Is that
Oh yeah. So
okay?
when I wanted to go to art school, of course my parents were like, absolutely not. Like a lot of parents where they're like, you're gonna get a real degree so you can pay your bills, and then from there you can do what you want with your money. So I went with criminal justice. I actually work in financial crime currently as my day job because self-publishing is expensive.
Yeah.
And then I also do paid beta reading on the side as well as some ghostwriting that I've done before too, which does not make as much money as financial crime investigations, but you got to get out there somehow, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you got to find the time. Wow, so is there any element of, I mean, did you say criminal justice accounting? Is that what you said? Sorry, there was a lot for my brain. My brain just shorted out.
I did criminal justice, and then I also did a language degree with Spanish reading and culture. So I did.
Okay. I guess the reason where I was going with that was I was wondering if any aspect of your day job finds its way into your fiction because it's such a very specialized day job.
Yeah. So I've often considered doing true crime fiction because that would be, I can pull from real life experiences with that one. And I love reading true crime, but there's not enough magic in it for me to enjoy the writing process. So the
Right.
closest that it comes down to is the intense like investigations and research you have to do with criminal justice degrees or financial crime investigations. You have to do a lot of background checks. You have to dig into people in places you wouldn't really expect to dig into. And you can take that and you can apply that to building your own world, your own characters, digging into other cultures and things like that, as well as just keeping yourself organized and a little bit of self-discipline too that comes from that job. Sorry, my
Okay.
cat is like, she's obsessed with the laptop.
I was wondering. I wasn't going to say anything, but I love it.
I know she's like rubbing her chin against it, and if I move her, she's just gonna find a way back up.
But that's oh, okay. Introduce us to your cat.
So this is Alex. She is as mean as she is pretty.
She's gorgeous.
So yeah, yep, she'll come back. She likes. Even when I played my D&D, she loves the camera for some reason. I don't know.
Well, no. Well, see, now our watchers will know that every time the camera moves, it's just your cat saying
It's
hi.
her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's better than thinking like, oh, are you experiencing an earthquake? Is everything okay? Like, okay. Okay. Meet and greet app. Okay. I'm interested in this only because I see a lot of people post on our, D&D and tabletop role-playing forums, looking for games and stuff like that. So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about that just to help anybody who's watching this and is like, how do I find a game?
Sure, yeah. So Meetup is a free app that you can download, and you basically just make your little profile. It doesn't ask for much beyond your name and a couple of interests and a picture, and then you can search like interests. So you can search like book clubs in your area, or writing groups in your area, or D&D or tabletop games in your area. And then what's cool about it is you can actually see all the members that are part of that group already, and then you can see reviews if they've left, so you know if it's legit or if it's the type of player. And then the owner of whatever group you decide to find will often post schedules of when they're going to meet at public libraries. Was a popular one back in North Carolina. Also, one that people overlook because they're not super big in the public eye is actual like gaming stores. Comic book stores often run a lot of games. Public libraries, like I mentioned earlier, run a surprising amount. That's something that they're big into. And then also tabletop and video game stores themselves, like the locally owned ones specifically. Like we have one called the Gameskeep, and the entire back half of their building is actually like 5 or 6 tables that they reserve for people who want to come play various tabletop games, and it's completely free. You have to look for it. The only downside is if you live in like a small town, you're probably not going to find a lot, and you're sort of limited to just online stuff, in which case your best bet is Facebook groups, to be honest.
Right, yeah. Okay. Oh my gosh, so much stuff. Okay, we talked about this Warlocks Anonymous just a little bit. So you said you played that as a one-shot. Did you build that out into more, or did I mishear that?
No, we started as one shot, and then I think we made it like 2 or 3 games because the people I was playing with, we had super busy schedules. I think every tabletop player knows that struggle, trying to find time with adults and growing lives and things like that. So we played 2 or 3 hours, and we started with a very simple introduction one called, I think it was called The Barber of Silvery Moon, which is like a comedic one shot that you can get for free on dungeonmasterguild.com. And you're basically investigating a barbershop where people are going missing. And when they appear several weeks later, they have crazy wild haircuts, but they have memory loss. And so you uncover like the secret behind it, and it's very cool classic gaming. And then from there, I was like, they enjoyed playing Warlocks Anonymous so much because it was very lighthearted and casual, because you can't do much with a whole warlock party. Like, right. Without a little bit of cunning. So I was like, let me make a whole thing out of this. So it ended up being like various characters were on the run from like wanting to go to warlock academies. They wanted to be outlaws. They kind of want to do their own thing. And I just split them through one-shots, just various one-shots, quick, simple, easy, fun to get through. That is good for laughs.
Yeah. Okay. So, and did you write that out and put it on DM's Guild, or?
I didn't. So I had all my one-shots saved on my last laptop that blew up. The battery. No. And I lost all of my writing, all of my work. It was gone forever.
Oh, so now frustrating.
So now I use iCloud and Dropbox and things like that, so it doesn't happen again. But all my first thoughts, I tried going through the Discord to find them before this interview, and I was like, it's so far gone now, like a year or 2 years ago.
Oh man,
it's a big bummer.
Yeah, if you ever find the time, I think that's a great premise. I think that would sell really well. Okay, so DM's Guild. Do you have anything up on DM's Guild or no?
Not since I started doing my novel, just because I haven't had time to put good effort into it. And the time I do have, I spend playing tabletop games with my online group instead of writing them, because it is very time consuming. Like, because you want to make it good, and because tabletop players are so sporadic, you have to account for so many different directions your story is going to go. So it can take hours for something that is only going to take 2 or 3 hours to actually play through. Right.
You're right. I get that. I do feel that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's I'm going to choose, let's kind of focus on the TTRPG stuff, and then we'll circle back to your fiction writing. So, considering that you have experience with both writing and tabletop role playing, and you've run, and it sounds like you've homebrewed some stuff. I mean, you kind of created the whole, that one shot. Can you kind of give some insight into the differences, world building for the two, if there's any, or anything that stands out to you?
Sure. So I think a big misconception that people come into the tabletop community with is that world building is going to be as elaborate as something like Critical Role,
Right.
with like professional voice actors, and they have the whole three-dimensional map and the backgrounds and everything. Most tabletop games are not going to have that. You're going to have a table that can sit 4 to 6 people. You're going to have your notebook, and if you're lucky, you'll have a module that's already been made and a couple of figurines that you've put together. So when it comes to world building from scratch, you have 2 different options. The first one is what fantasy writers use, as well as people who want to do big, long shot games that are going to take several sessions, the kinds that last several years, and that's completely homebrew, organic. And with that one, you want to start, I always go with start big and then hone in on the fine details of world building. So you start with, okay, well, what's the basic geographic of this area that you expect your players to go into? Is it an island? Is it a forest? Is it a mountain region? Are there multiple countries that they're going to have the ability to travel to, or are we going to be kind of stuck in one area? Because you can get off the map so quickly when you're creating from scratch. So once you got that down, then you're going to go into something smaller. Okay, what are the cities that they're going to be starting at, and where do you want them to end up? And then what's going to be between that? So you start with a kind of a sandwich, right? Your starting place is the bottom bread, and then you can make little cities, towns, encounters in the middle, and then in the end is the city that you want them to end up in, or the place that you want them to end up in. Although in tabletop, it's interesting because you can quite literally end up in a different world as your end game.
Yeah.
So that's something you have to keep in mind when you're writing, like how big are you going to go? And then once you have that, you have your names, you have an idea of what the geographic place is going to look like, kind of a hint of the monsters that you're going to have them encounter. And this can help a lot if you decide to go with, like, you hear me talk about D&D, but that's because I prefer fantasy. A lot of people do Vampire Masquerade, so they have a more modern setting. They have Cyberpunk or Shadowrun. Those are like kind of the robots and like futuristic sci-fi. So that's something you have to keep in mind. Am I going medieval, or am I going, this is the future and we're going like full cyberpunk kind of deal?
Yeah.
So once you do that, then hone in on the smaller stuff, such as, well, what are the people like in this city? What kind of culture do they have? What religions do they have? What kind of meals do they have access to? These small details can really help you flesh out your world and make your players feel super immersed. If you go to a place and then everything has like the same type of tavern, the same type of food, the same type of drinks, or in sci-fi games, the same type of missionaries and mercenaries and things like that, it's going to get boring real quick. So conquer it one little town at a time, but make sure you take time to put in those details. Ask yourself, if I was sitting in this position, what music would I hear at a cantina or a tavern? What kind of people are walking around outside? Are they all one race? Is it a mix of races? These are just little tiny things. And you don't have to go super in depth with them. A lot of tabletop DMing is a lot of improv, but you do want to have those bullet points that you can reflect back to, because your players are probably going to ask about that, and you want to be prepared and not stutter, because you don't want to break that immersion for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, oh man, I love it. You have a lot of info there. So I find it interesting because at least the advice I see a lot online for world building with tabletop role playing, especially if you're doing like a homebrew world and it's like session number 1, is to start small, because it's like, here, you're going to start at this inn. Now figure out, what are your players interested in? Where are they going? And then you build that out. But I find it very interesting that you kind of, and I think it makes a lot of sense to at least kind of have a good overall view of at least the,
like an out. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like you said, I mean, that sounds like an outline. Right. Okay. So, because it does it makes important sense that you need to know whether this place where they're starting at, this little tiny place, is on an island, is in the jungle, is, on a mountain. Wow. That's really cool. I think that's interesting. And this is why I do this, because that way people who are just getting into this have different perspectives, right? You might be hearing on the internet that you're supposed to start small, but that doesn't have to be. You can start big. So
I personally prefer starting big too, because, well, I also have very inquisitive players too, so they expect that from me as their DM, so I have to come prepared. And starting small is good if you're doing like a couple sessions, but for long drawn out ones, you definitely need to put more time into like, well, what's the bigger picture? Otherwise, you're
Right.
gonna have a lot of contingency situations. You're gonna have a lot of inconsistency, and it's just not gonna run as smooth.
Right. Yeah. No, I get that. So, oh gosh, I have so many things to circle back on. So, one of the things you mentioned was Vampire the Masquerade. You threw out a few of the others. So, are you also experienced in other tabletop role playing games or?
Yeah. So I've
Okay.
only DM'd Dungeons and Dragons, but I've played various other ones just because I love that community so much, and it's so
Right.
fun. Just sort of kick back and like let someone else kind of guide you on this adventure. It gives you a reason and kind of an excuse to be someone other than yourself and not have to worry about real life. Because in Vampires Masquerade, I'm worried about not being found out by the higher class vampires and what nonsense I'm getting into. Or in
Yeah.
Shadowpunk, I'm worried about what kind of crime are we going to pull off next. Like it's just a lot of fun. But
I
as
think
far as
that's great.
only Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of a thing. So I'm also on a podcast where we talk about tabletop role playing games, and recently I've been trying to kind of do this call to action for folks to like try something else besides D&D, right? Especially since the big fiasco earlier this year with the OGL. It's like why not just check something else out just to see, because I think it's important, to have that exposure, or else you don't know what's out there.
And oftentimes you'll be surprised, like maybe you were like, okay, Dungeons and Dragons and fun, but you might have a lot more fun with a different gaming system that maybe clicks better in your brain too. So I have a friend who plays D&D and Shadowrun, and she never even looked at tabletop gaming until a year and a half ago, until we brought her into it. And she's like, I enjoy D&D, but Shadowrun is just, it feels more involved. Like I had to
Mm-hmm.
think a lot more because I don't have magic or dragons. I don't know what I'm going to expect. I have technology and things too. And she doesn't read sci-fi. She doesn't like sci-fi, but she loves playing Shadowrun. So
That's
I do
interesting.
encourage people to branch out. And one shots are a great way to do that. You don't have to sit down and dedicate 6-8 hours of your life to a game you're not sure about. Or
Mm-hmm.
even if you just want to sit in on one, is a good way to kind of understand like YouTube channels and podcasts that cover it. Maybe
Yeah.
it'll inspire a game of your own.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, so I want to talk to you about how you organize your information if you're DMing a game. Do you have any particular tools that you use or methods, or is it all kind of like in your head or
I cannot do in your head. I know there are some DMs who can, but I have to be like I have to write it out completely. I can use some of my writing tools for creating worlds for TTRPGs. So one that I use is Scrivener, which is mostly for fiction writing, but it does have the ability to sort of write out all your thoughts and notes, or in tabletop gaming circumstances, your quests, your encounters on note cards, virtual note cards, and then you can arrange them how you want your players to encounter. And then you can go in on those note cards and you can put in more details. Also, I think it's called, I haven't used this in like a year and a half, but Roll20, I believe.
uh-huh.
I think is a really good one because that one you can upload a map and it actually has like little tokens and stuff
Mm-hmm.
for players or villages or monster encounters. So that's really helpful if you're a visual learner. And so the way I did it, I would take a poll in my group. Okay, what kind of story do you want to see next? Do you want to do a spooky carnival? Do you want to do something like a Silvery Moon where it was just comedic? Do you want to do a classic dungeon crawl that's going to wear on your brain and make you test your puzzle skills? And I let my players decide the basic topic. And then from there, I'll go, okay, these are the
Mm-hmm.
big monsters I want in this. And then I'll build the story around that and the encounters around that. And then, of course, my favorite part is looking at treasures because players love when they're rewarded for their hard work. So
Yeah.
I'll building that in, and then I'll think about the town. And it's easier for this thing it's called coding in fiction writing, but it's where you take something that already exists and you use that as your template, which is
Mm-hmm.
can save you so much time in building tabletop games. So for example, I might be like, okay, well, I want this to take place in a world like Faerun. So I don't have to think about the grander scheme of things or the world or the politics. I'm like, I'm going to take place in this unnamed town in Faerun that no one's ever heard of because I made it up. And then I'll pull inspiration from that and build up from there. Because usually one shots, you're not going to get super far in the world because again,
Right.
it is limited just a couple hours.
Right. Wow. What did you call that? Not
Uh,
templating. What was it?
Coding.
Coding. Okay. You
Yes.
see, I don't know why I forgot that. I have an accounting background, and coding made a lot of sense to me because I was thinking of like nested code, where it's like you were saying, you start off with, okay, what's the idea behind this thing? So that would be like if you don't know anything about coding, don't mind me. But just, you have your outer parentheses. Okay, that's like the vague idea. And then within that are the nested parentheses formulas of like, okay, within this, we're going to have this, this, and this, which impacts this. And for some reason you said coding, and that made sense in my brain. So that's really cool. Um, okay, gosh, you are just full of so much knowledge that I'm trying to figure out how to process it all and which direction to go. Um, okay, so it sounds like okay, you put all your information in Scrivener, which I did use Scrivener for a short minute. I apologize if you guys can hear my dog. I'm sorry. Hopefully you can't. But I've used Scrivener for writing, but I since then have transitioned away from it. So I've never used it for tabletop role playing games. But I do kind of vaguely remember that I could like you said, kind of have like cards where I had things written out, and if I needed to change the order, it was just a matter of taking this card or this thing and just moving it, and now it's in a different location, and it made for some really quick adaptation if they went whoop, you know, I could see that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm telling you, that's a common thing with players. They'll just be like, nope, I'm gonna go in the other direction what you're planning.
So speaking of that, oh sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just because I can't remember the name of it, even though because I used it before Scrivener. It was called like World Anvil, or
is it World Anvil? Okay, I use World Anvil now for DMing. I love it.
Really good too if people haven't heard of that one, which I'm sure most people who have DM have at least encountered that one.
Yeah, or heard of it, right? Okay, so oh shoot, my brain. We were talking about. Shoot, I'm gonna have to rewind and like go. What were we talking? Because I had a question and it just left me. We were talking about DMing. Guys, I might cut this out. Sorry. What were we?
Players going in opposite directions.
Yes, that's what it was. Thank you. Players going in opposite directions. Okay, so how do you, considering now that you know, as a DM, I think this is the major bane of a DM is there's that balance between being prepared for the session and how much is too much over preparation because the players will just kind of do their own thing and it's unexpected and you didn't prepare for that. And so my number one advice to people in that position is you can prepare, but I think the key skill to DMing is learning how to improvise. And are there tools that you use that you would recommend to folks who are, you know, let's say baby DMs learning how to do this, that you have available to you for when the players take a side route?
That's a good question. All right. So I would say, I guess it also depends, like, just like in fiction writing, there's people who plan out their story and the people who just kind of fly by the seat of their pants, called pantsters. And there's two different types of DMs too. There's people who will take hours or days beforehand and plan it all out. And there's some that might just be like, okay, here's a basic outline and that's what I'm going to go with. I think if you're a baby DM, starting with a little bit over preparation is good. And then as you get more comfortable with your players and what their tendencies are, then you can kind of cut back a little bit. But in terms of that, I would say start with a handful of quests. The most basic, start with a quest board. Introduce your players to a quest board right off the bat and say, okay, here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different quests that you can pick from. Quests that you've already ordained from the beginning. And then before the game, plan out a little bit of each quest. So no matter which one they take, they feel like they have agency in the option, but you're still allowing a little bit of improv because you're not like, okay, well, this is the quest you're going to do. Instead, you have 5 options. And also just being comfortable with your players, which is why it's a lot easier to like start a friendship and then go into D&D, or not just D&D, but tabletopping DM. Mm-hmm. Because when you're comfortable with your players, you're more comfortable joking and letting loose and not taking yourself or your players so seriously, because it is supposed to be a fun time. So if you're like, okay, well, I had a plan for you guys to go investigate this mysterious murder at this Warlock's Keep, and they're like, you know what? I think I'm just going to go out of town. One thing I'll do if I didn't prepare for that is I'll make them encounter a dangerous monster as soon as they go out of town. That'll dissuade them from going further. So if they're like level 3, I'll be like, okay, well, here's a young dragon that's waiting outside of town. And then they get their butts kicked and they're like, okay, let's go back and rethink our plan. So that's sort of an organic way you can be like, I don't want you to go this way, but if you insist on doing it, okay, but there's going to be consequences. Is a helpful tool too, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, completely. It's kind of, it's that finding the balance between like, you're not railroading, but you're giving them the agency, but also kind of showing them like, yeah, there could be a consequence to your action. There are dangerous monsters outside or what have you. A flood arrives. I don't know.
Yep. So, way. Like,
Right. Oh, this is fantastic. Okay, so let's pivot a little bit and talk about your fiction writing. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you have coming out?
sure. So like I mentioned earlier, Trials of Ira is a high fantasy, dark fantasy, also sapphic fantasy. Which is just, if for people who don't know that term, it's basically women who love women. So bisexual, pansexual, lesbian, that kind of thing is the main romance. But in this case, I've gotten feedback from my beta readers that are like, think of Elsa, but she's evil and also a lesbian. So apparently that's been a selling point. I deal with a lot of terms of like generational trauma and stopping the cycle of abuse in a fantasy world, especially because the main character is born into royalty, and then the expectations others place on you and what happens when you're unable to meet those expectations. And in this case, I turned her into a villain at the end because I was like, you know what? I'm tired of reading like the hero always takes the high road, because there's just too much feminine rage out there for that to be what everyone wants all the time. So she's going to pivot and just be like, I'm tired of doing the right thing. I'm going to do what's good for me, hashtag self-care, even if that means starting a war or like getting revenge or something like that. So takes place in this world which is plagued by this sentient malevolent forest called the Witchwood, which keeps all the countries separated so that they can't call on each other for allies and resources, and they're all sort of self-contained. And then within the Witchwood are spirits, monsters, all sorts of crazy stuff, lost civilizations and treasures. And there's a group or a faction there called the Wardens, who kind of keep the Witchwood from growing too far. If monsters break into other cities, they're sort of the ones who are called on, but they're also kind of outlaws because no one really likes them. They're extremely dangerous. And then my main character finds herself wrapped up in a plot with this as she's trying to outrun her past. So yeah, I'm pretty
Wow.
excited about it. It's going to be in 3 parts. And like I said earlier, December, the first one's going to be released. And then 2024, the next 2 parts will be released because they're already written. They just have to go through editing.
Right. Okay, so quick question just in case, because it's you've got a December release date and I hear that people are describing it as evil lesbian Elsa. Are
Yeah.
there winter themes involved in this
Yeah.
book?
Uh,
Okay.
so Ira is actually the Welsh Scottish word for snow. So the name of the country that takes place in is Ira, and it's a constant winter wasteland or wonderland, depending on your point of view.
Yeah.
So yeah, she's constantly in the cold, and that's one of the main things. Is she is actually born in this fantasy world, but she's one of the few people who don't have magic. So she also can't travel far because the weather's so unforgiving that you can't get 3 or 4 days without frostbite, a winter blizzard, something like that. So yeah, lots of snow, lots of winter, but like the scary side of winter.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds fantastic. Okay, now your magic system. I want to touch on this because I think this is a big topic for fiction writers is magic systems. You know, whether
Mhm.
it's going to be a soft magic system, a hard magic system. Do you want to talk a little bit about your magic system or how you came up with it or anything like that?
Yeah, so obviously with fantasy, magic is almost pivotal almost all the time. And I only recently learned a couple months ago that there are people who actually had soft magic. I didn't know that
The
people didn't
term.
have
Yeah.
consequences and stakes in their fantasy stories. So things like, what is it called? Like speculative fiction, I think is what the genre is called, but it's basically modern fantasy. So you have like a witch who lives in New York City. She's going to have a soft magic system because you don't need world changing consequences in a world where you have Uber and fast food and things like that, right?
Right.
But in a high fantasy, I personally think that it's important to have hard rules. And the big thing with hard magic systems is you have to have rules and consequences that you don't deviate from, because readers can lose the immersion. If you're like, okay, so magic just pops in and solves this, then
Right.
what's the point of being scared of it or running through this intense couple of chapters just for magic? Like, okay, all done. So I actually set aside like 25 rules of hard magic before I started, and it did take some working on because I didn't want to be too cliche, but I also didn't want to be crazy to where readers were going to be lost if they were just coming here for a good time, right? So
Right.
I do magic, and in my world, in this case, magic is strictly bloodline oriented, so you can't get magic any other way. Um, which makes for the main character who is born without magic curious, because you're like, okay, well, if her parents were magic, then what happened with her blood?
Mm. Interesting.
And then consequences are life and death with magic. So if you push yourself too hard, the magic will kill you. It basically an aneurysm is what'll happen, because it is so internalized inside of you that you can't just do these crazy acts without suffering severe injury. And one of the main characters I introduced in the next book actually has something similar, to where she expanded so much magic to get herself out of a situation. She's now permanently scarred from that. Like, she lost her sight, so she has to navigate a world around that. And I find that readers really enjoy when they're like, they hate it, but they love it too. They're like, how are you going to hurt me with this? But also, I love that there was a price to be paid and they went ahead and did it anyway.
Right.
And so something that people who go for fantasy really look for. But yeah, soft magic, you don't have to go as hard as rules. You just have to have a general over basis. And rule of thumb, don't make magic your way out of everything in any type of fantasy book. Because readers are like, meh, that's boring. We see the character grow and struggle.
There's no stakes, It's so funny that you just, I think not verbatim, but there were a few key words that you said there that I just released a video maybe like 2 weeks ago talking about the kind of like natural law or kind of natural law of things, and how if you break, once you have a law set in place, whether it's, your magic system or, gravity or what have you, if you break that law just because it's convenient for you, the writer, to have it happen that way, then yeah, your readers are going to go, what?
Yeah,
that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, and you will lose them. So it's an important reminder to, and I think that's an important part of world building. I'm curious to know, like you said, you wrote down like 25 things or something. Yeah. I mean, you probably had to sit there and think about all the different ways this is going to impact your entire world, the consequences. Yeah. Yeah,
so let me see. So I typed it out mostly to hold myself accountable, but also to send to my developmental editor, because she also has to hold me accountable for breaking rules and stuff like that. So let's see, some of the ones I have on here. In this world, magic works as genetic. So if your parents have a certain affinity for magic, you're more likely to be born with that kind of thing. There's an entire study on cultivating it's basically like a gene study to kind of cultivate the perfect magician or sorceress with the most powerful things.
I was going to ask if there were any experiments or anything like that. Yeah.
And our character does, in fact, she is a victim of one of these experiments, as her family tries to, again, force her into those expectations, and nothing happens. And then, of course, it sets her life off the rails and makes her a target. We have... magical genes can be recessive. So that means that, okay, maybe it skipped a generation, but it's still in there somewhere, which is where, in this story, at least, extreme gene therapy comes into play. Sort of like, if you're thinking X-Men and Wolverine, that's sort of where I got that inspiration from. Yeah. They force that to manifest in order to protect yourself as a character. Just things like that. Like,
this is fascinating. This is great. So I want to ask about... go back to when you first came up with this concept to write this story. What was the initial anchor that you started world building around?
So that's a good question. This can be different for so many different fiction writers, especially. But for me, I focus on names. I get inspiration from names. So I had several names in other languages that I was like, oh, it'd be so cool to kind of make a story around that. In this example, Ira was the one that I chose because I thought that was such a beautiful name. But I would say the anchor to world building is, I started with something very basic. I was like, I want a scary forest that eats people. I want queer heroes, because I'm tired of reading constantly about the straight male hero all the time. I get it. Those are great stories, but I want more. And then I also wanted an ice queen, and I wanted an outlaw that fell in love. So those were the things that I was like, man, I could really use a book that's like that. And so those were the very basic grains that I started with. And interestingly, Trials of Ira was supposed to be a character exercise for the main character, who is the villain in the next book. But she was not the original main character. What had happened was, I was writing her in these scenes in the next book, and I was like, she just feels so flat. Like, no one's going to root for a character that they're not engaging with. So I was like, let me do a couple of writing exercises, get to know her. And then as I started doing that, I was like, oh crap, she's got a lot of stuff going on. And so I just kept writing, and eventually I had enough scenes where I was like, dang, I could string a whole story from this. And now she's going to be the first book of the release instead of my original intent, which was the outlaw character that I mentioned earlier.
Wow. I know we haven't gotten to tips and tricks yet, because that's usually what I save at the end. But for new authors, that is a fantastic piece of advice, is if you need to kind of delve into the mind of a character so that you get a better idea. I'm sorry, I'm tripping over my own words, because that is good. That is good advice, folks. I'm going to tell you that right now. All right, so that's so cool. Okay, so you built everything from kind of that small concept and built it out. Um,
Mhm.
as I'm trying to figure out how to word this. Um, as you started writing, or as you write, do you have a particular author or some kind of yeah, I guess author that you maybe like shadow your work off of, that you feel like is kind of inspiring your work, or is there a piece of work that you feel like is impacting how you write? I don't know if I'm
No,
yeah.
no, it makes total sense. Let me think. Because obviously most writers are obviously avid readers as well, because you have to
Right.
be, they go hand in hand. But what started me on that? So interestingly, the biggest inspiration I get for stories is when I'm reading a book or I'm watching a movie that disappoints me, where I'm like, you know what, you had such a cool concept here and you just did
Missed
not.
opportunity.
So like a prime example is the Twilight series, which I know a lot of us are familiar.
Yeah.
We have love hate nostalgia with it, but Twilight was an interesting concept. You have this different idea of vampires. You have a girl who's immune to vampire magic, which is what it comes down to. And then you also have her mysterious tie in with a werewolf clan. Like, at a surface level, that seems like something that people like fantasy and paranormal romance would really love. But then as you dive into it and you get further into books, you're like, okay, like,
Mhm.
what's going on? What's happening? Which is where a lot of writers also get their start in fan fiction, because that's basically what fan fiction is you loved a story so much you either wanted to see more or it fell flat, so you're like, well, I'm just going to write my own version of this for fun.
Right.
So popular authors, Lee Bardugo is one, obviously. Holly Black is one, Cassandra Clare. They all started as popular fan fiction writers first, and then they pivoted from that to their original work, which is calling back to the Inuyasha fanfic I mentioned earlier.
Oh
What
yes.
it did in that case was I wanted to see so much more of Kagome, to those who are familiar,
Uh-huh.
in this old Japanese world, and how her modern like sensibilities sort of keep her alive in unexpected situations. Of course, in the brain of a middle schooler wasn't that complex, but that was what it came out to. But what happened was the fan fiction started going so off the rails of like what the original story was, that I was like, if I just change these names, this would be a completely different story. And that's what
Mhm.
a lot of people find themselves doing. It's like, okay, well, what happens if I do take that and see what I can find if I realign this as an original story instead of a work of fan fiction? I
Right.
don't know if that's your question or if I went
No, no,
off
no.
the.
That's fine. This is. Is there any place that people can find this Inuyasha fanfic, or is it gone
Oh god,
forever?
oh god, no. It was on fanfic.net, but I used like, I think my username was like Silver Moon Priestess 2000, like something nonsense. I don't even remember what it was anymore.
Oh gosh. Okay, so you're writing. It feels like you've been writing for a while now. Would you call yourself a plotter or a pantser, or are you somewhere in between?
So for a while I thought I was a pantser, but what I found is that when I took on the novel writing process, like, okay, this is a work that I'm going to publish, the pantser thing was not going to work for me, because I kept writing myself into dead ends. I would go off on tangents. There were contingency errors that were very distracting. So I went back and I watched a bunch of videos from people on YouTube, master classes, skill shares, just anything that I could find that was for free, because things do get expensive. But what I learned, I was like, let me just try this outline. And I found, I didn't know this was a thing that authors do, but apparently so. V. Schwab, which I think I mentioned earlier, she does this, and a couple other fiction authors, is they don't have a beginning, middle, and end when they first start. What they have is a couple of scenes that they really want to write. And so they'll write those out without any context, and then they'll look at them and be like, okay, now how do I build a story around these scenes that I just created? And then after that, your beginning, middle, and end start forming around those particular scenes, which is exactly what I do.
Interesting.
So with the character study, I started with, I think it was probably 6 or 7 different chapters or scenes that were completely unrelated. And then when I put them together in a note card format, and I was like, okay, how can I make this cohesive? Then that's when your brain's like, all right, well, what if you do this to tie this into this, and etc. and things like that.
Wow, that is cool. I don't think I've really heard about that particular method of writing, but this is why I do this, because again, people who are starting out, I mean, there's not just one way. You can try to fit yourself, what is it? Square peg in a circle? No, circle peg in a square. You get what I'm saying. You get what I'm saying, internet. But, don't try to fit yourself in there. There's a lot of different methods. And the other thing I'm going to say that I'm hearing from you is that you need to take the time to figure some of these things out. I think new authors might be a little bit impatient because they just want to get to it already. I want to get published. I want to finish a book. And sometimes you need to take the time to do this character study, or, write the bad scene so you can figure out what's wrong with the bad scene so you can fix it. Things like that. That's great. Okay, so you're more leaning on the plotter side is what you're saying.
Nowadays, yes, but I will say this book ended up being so much longer than I anticipated. I think it's going to land around 120, 130 for all 3 parts. And that was because with high fantasy, the world building, you have to weave it in so organically, because I think we talked about this earlier. You don't want to info dump on anyone, whether fiction writing or in tabletop playing, because your character's like, okay, well, first off, they're not going to retain that information. And also it's boring. So you have to find a way to create scenes where you can organically implement this stuff about the world, about especially fantasy. Like, you're making up names out of nowhere. People don't know what the heck you're talking about. So I have an editor who came back to me. She was like, I love this story, but I'm a little confused on like what's the difference between Ira, Elysian, these names that I had come up with that made sense in my head because I'm the one writing it. And she was like, but from a reader perspective, I have no idea what you're talking about. So you have to go back and find a way to organically bring those up, either through, one of my favorite methods is having an older character tell a story to a younger character. Is a great way to kind of implement that. Or books inside your book is a great way. One of my characters is a professor, so he has like 2 or 3 books that he's published, and something as simple as the title just gives you information about the world, and that's something that readers are going to be able to keep with. But yeah, after you set your mind on, I'm going to publish this, outlining will save you so much time. And everyone, I was guilty of this too, everyone says that. All the published authors are like, you got to outline if you're going to take this serious. And I was like, nah, I'll figure it out. And then you're like, oh, dang, I keep throwing away thousands and thousands of words. I need to go back and reassess what's going on. And then, yeah, doing the legwork for the character analysis and things like that. You have to find a way to make it fun for yourself. Like, if you're not inspired to read or write, then your writing is going to suffer for that. So if you do find yourself in a rut, put the writing down a little bit, watch some fun classes on YouTube. Jenna Morishi, I think is her name. She's one of my favorite authors to write. She actually started in financial industry, and then now she's a fully published author, and she gives advice for like self-publishing, self-editing, making sure your worlds don't fall flat, and all that kind of stuff is free. And then once you start feeling that inkling of inspiration, you can pick up the keyboard or the pen again and be like, okay, I'm going to approach this with a fresh mindset. But you don't want to write yourself into a corner with any part of the process.
Right. Have you written yourself into a corner that you had to back yourself out of?
Oh, yes. So the easiest advice for that is, and this is one that I found in my writings groups that people struggle with, is you put so much time and effort into getting to the scene that you thought was going to be really good. And then when you come to the end of it, you're like, oh, crap, this is not landing how I want it to land. And what you have to do is you have to scrap it. I mean, people say discard everything, delete nothing. So put that away somewhere. I have a whole folder that's all discarded chapters that I never look at again. Open up a blank Word document and be like, okay, I did not get the result I wanted, so I'm just going to start fresh. I'm going to rewrite from the beginning. And oftentimes you'll find yourself that you open up new avenues you didn't originally think of. So never feel like you've locked yourself in, because it's your writing. And as long as it's not out there, you can still go back and delete it and change it however you want.
Yeah. All right. Since you kind of touched on it a little bit, let's talk about some other like world building or writing resources and tools that you've used. You mentioned, you've listened to some podcasts. You use Scrivener. Anything else you want to talk about as a resource?
Let me think. So for tabletop specifically, Jenny D on YouTube, I really love her videos.
Yeah.
You're familiar with her, so she does world building. Also just taking an analytical listen to your favorite podcast. Like if you do listen to Critical Role, or one of my favorites, they don't do a podcast anymore, but they were hilarious. It was just 4 guys who never played D&D before trying to figure it out. And it was called...
Is that the name of it? Oh, sorry.
The Tavern. But you listen to those, and after you listen to it the first time, you go through and you listen to one of your favorite episodes again, you'd be like, okay, so why did this work? Like, what did I really like about this scene? And you start asking yourself questions like that. And it is time consuming, because you start doing it with books too. When you're writing fiction, you're like, okay, so why did this literary device work? But when you recommend authors, podcasters, groups that you already kind of pull inspiration from, or you enjoy listening to, you can learn a lot from them just by kind of taking a little bit longer to think about it.
Yeah, that's a really great, you're chock full of advice, girl, and I love it. Because that is a really good a good piece of advice to tell people to take an analytical look. I think so many times we're consuming, whether it's fiction or movies or what have
Mhm.
you, and if you want to build something like that, I mean, that's how you emulate, your heroes, is take a good look at how they're doing what they're doing and why it works or why it didn't work. Or yeah, take a look at the bad ones. Why didn't that work? Why did
Yeah.
Twilight not work? I don't know. And apply that to yourself. That's a really good piece of advice.
And you'll find that, like, if you're doing it with something that you actually love listening to, like your passions, it's not as complicated or as dreary as you might make it out to be in your head. You're like, oh God, you want me to like, analyze a 3 hour podcast? I don't think so. But
Right.
if you enjoy listening to that already, it's really easy. So definitely D&D podcasts or tabletop podcasts if that's the route that people want to take. But for fiction writing, I really love V.E. Schwab's No Right Way podcast, which is a limited series. It's only like 20 episodes that she did during COVID, and she brings on other famous authors, and they talk about their writing process, and they're super consumable. And then also Deadline City podcast are two authors who they started in children's literature, but now they're nationally famous, and they go to a bunch of writing conferences, and they cover all genres, and I love listening to them because they go deep into the bad parts about writing too, like the burnout and the making sure you're not ruining the writing experience for yourself, you're not offending people unintentionally, putting time and effort into your story. But they're also hilarious, so it doesn't feel like they're just throwing
It's
information at me.
entertaining too.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I love the recommendations. I don't think I've listened to either of those podcasts, so now I'm going to have to take a look, see if I can find them for my downtime. Any other like resources or tools that you use,
So
or is that
another one for fiction writing, again, that's my specialty, so that's why I keep going back
right?
to that one.
That's fine.
But there's a series that I heard a bunch of people recommend, and I finally checked it out. And actually, most people's public libraries have them in stock too, which is great. And it's called the Writing Great Fiction series. And you can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it from thrift books or, like I said, the library. And what's great about those is it's like 5 different books, and each book focuses on a literary device. Like one focuses on plot and development. If you're struggling with that, you can just pick up that book. There's one on making your characters interesting. There's one on outlining versus just going for it. And the great part about it is that they have exercises at the end of each chapter to sort of reiterate what you just read about, which is great. And they also have a bunch of references to popular works that are already out there for you to reference in your head as you're sort of going through it. And then for writers of all types, I personally recommend if you have the money for a subscription box, Ghost Scribbler is my all-time favorite box. I actually just got their box like the other day. And it's specifically for writers. And what they'll do is they'll send 1 to 2 books every month. But then on top of that, what they'll also send is writer goodies like fountain pens, journals, that kind of stuff. But they'll include essays from published authors about their writing process. They'll include a meet and greet, like a virtual meet and greet online with someone in the agency, whether that's an editor or a publisher or a writer.
Wow.
And then they'll also send you little pamphlets called passports that are on their website that focus on like specific things in a much smaller format. Like say you're struggling with fight scenes, then you can just pick up their fighting scene passport, and it's super helpful. Like I have a stack of them now of the little passports, and I keep them in my bathroom for when I like forget to bring my phone in there.
I love it. You're just always learning. Always be learning, folks.
So yeah, I love that box. It is like $40 a month now. It didn't used to be that expensive. It is now. So I know it's not for everyone, but if you do have the money, it's incredible. And especially with help analyzing books, what they do is they'll send you a book that goes with the other themes. So I just got one by Dean Koontz. I'm using it as a stand because my laptop's so short.
Yeah. Oh, that's fine. I love Dean Koontz.
Yeah, so they sent us one of his books, a signed book by him, and then also an essay that he wrote about writing this book. And then their passport is focused on interesting characters, which is like the hook of this book. So all of it ties together for if you need help kind of launching into that analyzing part of writing.
Wow, that sounds so cool. And you said you get that like every month?
Yep, you get it every month. And they also have a slim version, which doesn't come with as many goodies, but still comes with the book and like the writing essential stuffs of it.
Wow, good resource. I like it. What about any kind of last bits of advice? Not last, but bits of advice. I mean, you've given tons of advice. I think I should just like let you off the hook. But this is where I usually ask, if you have any advice for folks who are just starting out, or help to help folks keep pushing through. Any advice for that?
Yeah, so I'm glad that you said that because I am like, I hope all of this is making sense and I hope someone can learn from it because, gods, I wish I had a little bit more guidance when I started this journey instead of trying to figure it out yourself.
That's the whole point of this channel. The whole point of this show is I just wish I had some other folks show me and tell me how they do it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and like the thing with like the podcast I mentioned earlier, like I love listening to them, but these are also from authors who are already successful, like wildly successful, names you recognize in Barnes and Noble and stuff.
mhm,
And so when you listen to that as a writer, you're like, ah, that's never going to be me. So I think it helps to learn from like indie authors or like tabletop community, like small groups like that, because it can just
mhm,
sort of validate that you're on the right path. But
right.
for authors, let's see, I put my notes. I had three things that I recommended. The first one is get involved in the community. I know everyone says that, but what I did was I started my Bookstagram account, which social media is so consuming. So don't think you have to go hard. It'll be a slow process, but eventually it'll build up. But I went into Instagram and I would look up hashtags that I was interested in, like dark fantasy author or indie author, or in my case, queer authors. And then I would find posts and profiles that use those hashtags a lot. I would go on their profile. I would see if there was any like common ground that I could reach out to them about, even if it's just something like commenting. I messaged one yesterday about her cat who just got out of surgery. Like, I was like, yeah, my cat just got out of surgery too, and she's right back to being a terror of the house. So I messaged her about an author, and so we got to talking, and then you just rinse and repeat, and you can meet so many interesting unlikely people that way. Don't focus on like the big accounts with thousands of followers. Focus on the small ones, because those are the people who are actually going to be active and who are going to have a personal connection with you.
Right.
Secondly, attend local conferences. Now for tabletop, they don't have as many local conferences in pretty much any area, but they do have Gen Con, for those of you who haven't heard of that,
Right.
which is a huge tabletop convention that just happened a couple weeks ago, actually.
Recently.
Great place to meet like-minded people. My friend came back with like 34 new board games from small like indie companies, and they're tons of fun. But writing conferences, bigger cities, it's easier. But a lot of the big ones, like I just finished the Romance Mastery Summit, completely online, and it was free as long as you watch the videos within 48 hours. If you wanted to keep them, there's like a premium pay, so I did the free version. Writers Hub Fest is coming up. That's in the UK, but again, they have like a $15 virtual ticket where you can still watch all the conferences, and hearing from those authors really can just help you in ways that you don't even really expect. So that's a big one. I go to a small one that is in Kentucky every year. It's like a couple hundred people, but you never know when you're going to meet someone that can help you on your
Right.
journey, or even just a friend in the community that can be helpful. And then lastly, when in doubt, join a book club, whether that's online or in person. A lot of people in book clubs either do writing as a hobby, or they know writers or editors in that industry, and it's the easiest way. A lot of libraries host book clubs. That Meetup app I mentioned will often have book club options on it. So yeah, those are my three easy and free ways to get more involved and kind of help your career get a boost.
Wow. Yeah. Gosh. Oh man, I can't wait to just promote this show with just like wealth of knowledge right here. This is great. So I want to touch on, you mentioned you talked with an author who had a cat, or you messaged an author. Do you follow at all? And you're on Instagram. Do you follow Mary Robinette Kowal? Do you know who she
I
is?
should I be following?
Okay, so she's an author. I love her. But she's an author. She's also on. I found her through a podcast called Writing Excuses, which Brandon Sanderson was on. He's not anymore because he's so dang popular. He doesn't have the time.
Yeah.
But it started out with Brandon Sanderson, who then kind of introduced me to Mary Robinette Kowal, and she has her own Instagram. And on her Instagram, if you love cats, she's really big on these buttons that you can have on the floor, and you teach your cat, like, this button, if you press it, it'll say outside, and then you teach your cat, like, when you've seen these, I think
Yeah.
it's called Fluent Pet, which is totally off topic here, but we're gonna go on this rant real quick, or rave. But so she this cat that she has is so dang smart that her floor is like, I don't know, 60 buttons wide, and this cat can pretty much have conversation. She has taught her cat to have conversations, and it's her cat has a complete personality, because this author recently got a dog, and the cat hates the dog, so now there's a lot of the cat uses the word litter box as like a derogatory term, and so every time the dog is in the room, the cat is pressing litter box, litter box, litter, and you're like, yes, I know you hate this, just deal with it. Like
Crazy. I follow one who does that with, I think I don't know if it's a German Shepherd or what, but she has a dog and she taught him similar things. So I'm like, these
Yeah.
pets, we do not give them enough credit. Like Alice is sitting in the corner glaring at me. She's like, I know you're not giving away cat secrets over there.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to say. If you're an author and you love cats, you might want to follow Mary Robinette Kowal if you don't already. Um, Secondly, I can't believe I didn't mention this earlier when we were talking about tabletop role playing, but you are wearing some accoutrement that I think maybe ties into your character. Do you want to show that off a little bit? I can't really see
I'm
all of the
sorry.
horns.
I know.
That's So are
I
you a
got,
druid?
yeah, so I created a druid carrier character
I was
called
going to say you're
Morpheus.
not a terrier.
Yeah, no, character. She was a Circle of Dreams druid. Her name was Morpheus, and she basically was like very not ditzy, but sort of like kind of in her own world all the time. So she would just say the most outrageous stuff, and that was for the Stormlord draft game that I did. And what was so fun is that I play with a bunch of nervous, shy people. And one of the best rewards for DMing is like when your other players start coming out of their shells. It's so rewarding. So once I started dressing up, they started like bringing out the wigs and stuff like that, and it helps them get into their character. So yeah, I made this myself with like some cheap Michaels crafts and Amazon flowers, and then I got my little ears from the
Your
Renaissance
ears.
fair
And your cloak.
and my cloak. But I wear cloaks during the winter because I think they should be a full on fashion comeback. If you ask me,
Heck yeah, let's bring them back. Hashtag bring cloaks back.
exactly.
I love it. That's cool. I do understand what you're saying. As a DM, I have, I would say, yeah, one of my players for sure is very more on the introverted side of things. And when that player brings her character out and you can really see the role play, it's like, oh, I've
Yes.
done it.
A
So
little like a little bonus tip that I found with my players who again are very shy was back to what we were talking about earlier, just real quick,
mhm.
about how you want to balance being over prepared with under prepared because improv is such a big part. So one thing that I do with them is they're too nervous to speak first. So when I was playing alongside them, I was the one who spoke first and then they would follow that lead. So when I DM'd, what I ended up with was a bunch of awkward silence because no one wanted to talk over the other person. They weren't sure what to do. So I would do like a choose your own adventure sort of method where I'd like, okay, well, you see this, this, and this. So you have a couple of options here. You can go explore the tavern because you saw the newspaper boy talking about that. You can take a walk outside of town and see if you can find the merchant who is missing. Like giving them options like that, especially for new players and new DMs, can really help kind of like encourage them to come out and fall into their own confidence. And after a while, you won't have to do that anymore, but it did help a lot with them at least. So I
So
don't
it
know if
kind
that
of Yeah, no. So it sounds like instead of having it more like an open sandbox of what do you guys want to do, it's more of like giving them a multiple choice
Yep.
question so that at least they can choose something and head in a direction.
Yep. And
Yeah.
that's usually get them started. So that was a little DMing tip that really helped me. It won't work for everyone because a lot of people don't like being told what to do. That's the draw of tabletop is you can do whatever, but for the shyer people, it can help a lot.
Yeah. I think if I do another like tips and tricks episode, I'm gonna have you back on because you have a lot of information. This is great. Like I just want to keep going, but at some point we do need to wrap up.
Yes.
This is great. Okay, so where would you, if people wanted to find you to, get in touch, be a part of whatever you're doing, find out, when your book is coming out and all that, where would you like people to find you?
So I have author Haley Rivers on all my platforms. The one I'm most active on is Instagram, and you can feel free to reach out to me and just chat me up. I actually just met another author who messaged me randomly on Facebook. She has a novella coming out around the same time mine is. That's also a sapphic fantasy. So she just slid into my DMs, and we've been talking ever since. It's a lot of fun. So yeah, author Haley Rivers
That's
on
so cool.
Instagram. Follow me. I do follow back. So yeah.
Yeah,
That's
and
really
then you also have a website, which I have here, which
yeah.
is www.haleyrivers.com.
Yep, short and simple. I mostly just post like my fan fiction, the good fan fiction, not the bad fan fiction, because I still do write some of that, and then like short scenes on there, and then I do book reviews on there too for people who like my style of reading or like the books. I like to do reviews, and one thing I've started doing the last couple posts is I'll do a 4 readers review and a 4 writers review. So I'll take a book And I'm like, this is what you can learn as a reader from this book, and this is what you can learn as a writer from this book. So I found that to be popular because, again, it helps with that analyzing part for you to start getting those wheels turning when you're looking into that.
Right, yeah, and you're right. I mean, as an author or as a reader, you're going to take away something a little different, I think. So it
Mhm.
helps to kind of point that out and highlight that, save some people some time, right? Get
Yeah.
right to it. Wow, that's fantastic. Uh I guess, yeah. Oh man, I just want to keep asking you questions. I'm going through making sure I didn't miss anything. Is there anything that you want to end on? Any last words? Sounds very dark, but you know what I mean.
Very ominous.
Any
Um,
message you want to end on? Anything like that?
I guess the biggest message would be to just remember that you're writing for yourself first and everyone else second. So don't let everyone else's opinion bog you down and ruin something that you love to do.
Yeah, here to that. I think from my experience or from the folks that I've talked to, I find that the ones who become successful are the ones who wrote what they wanted to write and not necessarily what they thought they should write, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
There
Yeah.
are readers who want the same things that you do as a writer. So don't be afraid to just sort of explore that and don't let people get you down. They're not the ones writing a book.
Right. Yeah. Follow your passions because pretty sure there's going to be folks out there in the world who have that same passion. You just got to be confident enough to put it out there.
You got this. All of you listening, you all have
Yes.
this. I have faith in you.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much. So I just usually end the show with, keep creating, keep building, and that's it. But I feel like that's so shallow now compared to your advice. I love ending it on yours is
Still
just
good message.
follow your passions.
Keep it short and simple.
Yeah. All right, wonderful. Well, thank you folks for watching. And if you are very interested, which I am, in following Haley Rivers, then you can come find her on Instagram. That's where I'm going to be too. So, all right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on. I really had a good time talking to you.
Thank you. Me too. Set your alarm clocks for the December release of Haley Rivers' debut novel, Trials of Ira. For updates, follow her on Instagram at author Haley Rivers. Make sure you like and subscribe for more interviews like this, and thanks for getting Purdy Nerdy with us.